Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior and Community Center. I'm here today with David Harrison, and we're going to talk politics in just a minute. But I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for sponsoring Something to Talk About. We actually just got the most recent Best of Bainbridge Podcast Award, and we're grateful for that. You can actually vote for us through the weekend for the Best of Kitsap if you want. Anyway, Fieldstone offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care. They're located up on Rolling Bay, and they'd love to give you a tour so you can see their lovely facility and find out more about the services they offer, which include day stay and respite care programs. Call 206-594-1010. Ask for Randy O'Neill or Sierra Wood. Also, we make a point of acknowledging that we are living on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water. The Suquamish people have lived here since time immemorial, and we would do well to learn from their stewardship of these lands and waters. David is a senior lecturer emeritus at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the UW. He taught policy analysis and new program design at the Evans schools. And he now is sharing his wisdom with members of the community. I know I've taken classes through Bainbridge Community Foundation that he has run to help nonprofits here. And once a month, we check in with him. So thank you, David, for showing up today, as always.
Thank you.
I'm trying to, there we go. Somehow the camera went to just me. Sorry, my image is washed out. Today, as you would expect, we're going to talk about what the elections might mean. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what our standing is going forward on issues. And then we're going to end up with the Supreme Court, which I've got quite a bit that I want to say on that. So we'll have to try and restrain me in talking about the elections. I want to say before we do that it's never wrong to think the scariest, worst, most dangerous things about Donald Trump, because he doesn't necessarily have a filter, compass, or even necessarily, in my view at least, a set of values that are closely aligned with, say, the Bill of Rights or the Constitution. At least that's my view. But it's come to be said about me that I'm an optimist. I would say that the opposite of fearing the worst is not necessarily optimism. It could be that if you are fearing the worst but sorting out what you think is going to happen, that could make you an analyst. So I'm just saying, and it's true that I did prior to this election think it might be a door opening for us, and I do feel that, but I don't think that necessarily means optimism. It could mean a fair analysis of his permanently underwater approval rates. And before we got on, Sheila was saying some voters voted against Trump on this ballot because of the East Wing of the White House. It's funny, there are all sorts of things to talk about what's happening in America, but I do think that we'll find out that the door has been demonstrated to be open to those who oppose Donald Trump, that the door is open in a new way this week than it was last week. So let's sort that out. My other aside, I'm backing into this issue, is back when Kamala Harris was running against Donald Trump, now and again, the New York Times would have an article saying, well, enough about Trump. What's Kamala Harris think about Section C of the reauthorization of the Federal Trade Commission and the debate over, blah, 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 blah. She has been less than articulate on that issue. And I'm thinking, here's the story. One person is trying to ignore the Constitution and the other isn't. So it's almost like with this election, so say a monster was descending on Bainbridge Island and you heard that it was heading up 305 and that its next destination was, say, Rolling Bay. And you think, we're pretty alarmed about this monster. It seems to be eating everything along the way. Let's be concerned about it. And then you're talking to somebody and they say, I'm not sure it's actually eating things. I think we should be carefully assess just exactly what the monster is doing. But then you get film, and it's from, like Beechcrest or Timberlane, and you have film of the monster, and by God, it's actually eating things. And then, so you're saying to those people, you're not saying, if we ever defeat this monster, can we talk a little bit about housing density and, in Linwood Center? You're saying, can we join together to defeat the monster? My point is that there's a lot of analysis out there, just a whole new mess of it last week in the media about how Democrats need to refine their positions on multiple issues about which America cares. And that is certainly the case. We want, those of us who are at all associated with that party, want that party to have its act together in what it believes. But if you are running against somebody who is not necessarily clear about their adherence to the law, if they talk about invading Greenland and running for a third term, which is constitutionally prohibited, and perhaps sending troops to Nigeria, you are allowed to have that position in opposition to be centrally about, let's not elect that person. Our position number one is we are against what he is doing. If he is elected, if we are ever elected, we will pledge specifically to not do the things that he's doing. And when he's no longer around, if he has apostles, we're still worried about them doing those things. And for as long as there's somebody around who wants to do those things, our number one position is a negative position. We're not going to do those things. And it's time for the media to understand that if you put these arguments as like fine policy details, that you're normalizing what is the most politically abhorrent behavior of an elected official, at least since Buchanan in 1856. So that's my feeling about that. What Donald Trump said the other day is very interesting about what happened in the election. First, he said to the senators, we're losing on the shutdown issue, which is interesting because he hadn't said that publicly, and it's disadvantageous to John Thune and Mike Johnson for him to say that, but nonetheless, he said it. And then he said, and we need to shut down, we need to eliminate the filibuster. Well, they're not going to eliminate the filibuster because if you do that, then you don't have, when you're in the minority, you don't have any defense. But here's the story. Why does he want? He doesn't want to eliminate the filibuster to reopen the government that he doesn't believe in the first place. He wants to eliminate the filibuster because he wants to repress voting in America. He wants to have a chance, say nothing about the Senate. He wants to have the chance to win the House next year, and he would have a better chance if he didn't have a filibuster, because constitutional or not, he would try and have the national government restrict mail ballots and do other things to repress the vote. But so the good news is he's not going to be successful on that front. Second piece of good news is the Speaker of the House announced a couple of weeks ago that there is no path for Trump to run for a third term at 82, and that he told Trump that. The reason why Mike Johnson did that was not because he's trying to irritate the president, but because he noticed a little blip where in the polls where Americans disapprove of any such discussion. So at any rate, we're going into a situation where the second thing that Donald Trump said was, they say that we didn't do as well because I wasn't on the ballot. So first I thought, well, you're our number one vote getters, but he's right in this sense. When he's not on the ballot, for us, he's still on the ballot. So he just says things. And then when Abigail Spanberger is running in Virginia, she loads those things on the lap of her opponent. So it is true. The Republicans get the disadvantage of being associated with them without the turnout advantage of him actually running. So he's right about that. But here's the news. He's not going to be on the ballot again. He's not on the ballot a year from now either. If it was a disadvantage now, it's a huge disadvantage for next year and forevermore, because it's not a party. MAGA's not a party. It's a person. And his royalty is not transferable. There's not a prince. With Charles, Williams coming along, Brits are fine with that. The monarchy is inexplicable in the first place. In our case, this monarchy is inexplicable too. It's an autocratic wannabe. There is no successor. He can't name the successor. And it means what we have to do now that the door is open is push it all the way open. And we push it a great deal of the way open, depending on how we do a year from now. So one more thing on what we learned from the results. Did we learn anything by the fact that we won the governorship of Virginia? No, not so much. Doug Wilder, Democrat, was governor of Virginia. We've been governor of, we have a hard time winning 3 terms in a row in New Jersey, but we've had a lot of Democratic governors. What we learned instead is much more interesting than we could win a governor's race. If you're looking at the exit polls and you're finding out that we didn't just have an 8% upturn from 10 months ago, an 8%, 10% upturn in precincts abutting Washington, D.C., that are filled with federal employees that are either fired or not getting paid. We had an upturn in rural Virginia, 8 or 10% upturn from 10 months ago, based mostly on rural voters worried about tariffs and the economy. So interesting, very interesting. So the other lesson is we won 2 statewide public utility commission votes in Georgia. That's the first time we won a executive branch statewide vote in Georgia since a little bit after Jimmy Carter. It's huge. So we won 2 legislative seats in Mississippi that defeat the supermajority. So it was a great time. There was the argument before that we weren't going to do as well as we did in 2017 and 2018, that generic congressional vote shows right now that we're doing well, but not as well as when we took a ton of seats back in 2018. But the results were pretty close to pointing. The House, as you know, we're behind by 3-4 seats. The results are pretty close to us being able to win 15 or 20. Of course, that depends on what's happening with redistricting and such. But at any rate, it's all good. I do want to tease us a little bit. For those of you who are of this political persuasion, the interesting, you kind of sort of think that we're going to take back the House. It's happened 18 of the last 20 off-year elections. Only time it didn't happen was right after 9/11. George Bush didn't lose seats in the off-year election in 2012. And right after Bill Clinton was impeached for Monica Lewinsky, he didn't lose seats because people thought that he should have been not have been impeached over that particular set of circumstances. There are we would have to take back 4 Senate seats. The way you would do that is you beat Susan Collins in Maine, which might happen. Didn't happen 6 years ago. They love their independent senator. She's been a serious senator, but boy, she's given him a lot of votes on things she don't believe in. A lot. Boy, I don't know how you get up in the morning, look in the mirror, be Susan Collins and do that, but she's done it. And it's insisted upon. They would try to kill her otherwise. Susan Collins's race, you know, Sherrod Brown's running in Ohio. That's possible. And Tom Tillis is not running in North Carolina. So Roy Cooper is running for us, and we have a good shot. And that makes 3. So the argument about the 4th seat, after John Ossoff gets reelected in Georgia, which is no easy trick, after we win in Michigan, which is not automatic, would be Texas, as you know. So John Cornyn is running against the lieutenant governor whose name is, and he was very, very, very conservative. So the hope is that the lieutenant governor will beat Cornyn, and that whoever we run close to the middle will win Texas, as we used to 30 or 40 years ago. And that is interesting. It's possible. Cornyn's put $40 million into trying to be invincible, and he's not invincible. There's even some talk that Beto might jump back in, but Colin Allred, who ran last time, is a linebacker, former military man. They're not thrilled by the way he ran the campaign, but I wouldn't assume that he can't do exactly that. If that happened, then we would hold the majority. We would have 51 senators, and that would be a whole new world. But in terms of what you would want to have happen, you sure want to win the House, because it will slow a lot of things down. And that's of course what you're aspiring to 2 years into the president's term. Yes.
The internet tells us Dan Patrick, I think, is the lieutenant.
Dan Patrick, yes.
And I was reading G. Elliot Morris's Strength in Numbers blog today, and he was doing a little dissection of all this. And he also thinks that there's a chance, especially in a way in Texas, because the redistricting means they're taking strength from Republican districts and trying to spread it over Democratic districts. And that means that there's vulnerability in districts that they might not have had vulnerability in before, especially if the mood in the hinterlands does not improve. If we keep,
of course, that doesn't decide the Senate race, but there are a lot of people who are saying that +5 is not an automatic +5 when you shuffle your Congress people. Might be a +3. So there's that argument. Of course, if that argument exists in Texas, it would also exist in California. But it is not to be assumed that anytime you redistrict, that there is the automatic gain to be had, especially when you have an unusual year with a lot. A lot depends, of course, on the economy. We're getting a little inflation now, already enough for concern, and a little, so that's why Trump rails at the Federal Reserve as much as he wants, because he wants as much pump priming as he can get. He wants lower interest rates to spur economic activity between now and next November. He's playing it on all these fronts like he knows that it's not an easy thing to hold a 3-seat majority in the House, and he's right about that, and he won't hold it. That's, of course, insufficient in terms of blocking all his worst impulses, but it's certainly a better situation than we have now. Questions, thoughts, concerns on this matter?
I have one, please, David. I wonder about the fellow, and I think I've got the name wrong, is Tavoularis out of Texas. The fellow who's the minister, he's a minister, but he's also a teacher, high school teacher.
And what's he running for? Is another
I
candidate
think
for
for
the
this,
Senate?
I think he's running for the Senate in Texas. If
Well-
not, it would be assembly, it would be assembly. I mean, House.
Oh, well, I don't know him. He's not the leading candidate for the Senate for sure, because that's Colin Allred. But it's very early, as you know. Although some of these primaries are surprisingly early. Texas primary on who we're going to face for that Senate seat is in March. So that's pretty soon.
I'm sorry
that's
that
why
I don't
it's-
remember the name.
Ethan.
I think it's Tavares, something like that. Tavalr.
Somebody can look it up while we're talking. Tom, you had something.
Sherrod Brown has got a real good chance in Ohio, and especially the more Trump does the things that he's doing, the better Brown's chances will be. I think right now I would say Sherrod is, he'd be favored, but that remains to be seen. But I do support him. I already sent him some money, and I've known him for a long time. He was city councilman, I think, in Mansfield, Ohio, when he was like 18 or 19. He's been in politics forever, but he's a good man, hard worker.
Good. Well, I think that's a great shot. Of course, they worked really hard to get him to do that. It's a different time. So much depends on what happens in the next 2 years, but remember, in the next year, but remember the first time that Donald Trump was president, he had all sorts of people for a while, including, Mattis and Mick Mulvaney, people who are sort of trying to sand off the edges. And Stephen Miller's trying to sharpen the edges. So that's to Trump's disadvantage. His instincts are not muted like they were the first time around. You start talking about which country, and it hurts him. And we'll get to the Supreme Court, but it hurts him. It's like the other day, there's a federal court judge, as you know, that wants 100% of the food stamp money, SNAP money, to be distributed, and that's a debatable court case. But when Trump goes on Truth Social and says something about Democrats wanting their food stamps, then the judge is able to conclude that the government's position about what they're constrained from doing by statute is baloney, and that Trump is making arguments all the time to make it harder for the government to sustain his positions, because he's revealing his real truth after the government takes its formal position. Anything else on elections before we move on? It's all very interesting.
Yeah, I'll
We've
just
go
throw
ahead.
in, I think that Sheila was talking about James Tellerico, who is a Texas state representative. And apparently in September, he announced he was running for the US Senate.
Well, I think there's a congresswoman from Houston as well. So this is an unresolved matter, but let me just say that, you want whoever is close, who is camped out in the center, to be that candidate. Obviously, you don't want. I love, Beto was very exciting when he ran against Cruz, but you want somebody who really runs, at a little bit of a distance from the liberal/progressive core of the Democratic Party. That's an issue in Maine too. Bernie's got his candidate, who's a 40-year-old oyster fisherman. Very interesting. I didn't realize that Janet Mills is as old as I am. I'm not generally in favor of people my age, 77, running for Senate, but I would make an exception in her case if she's more likely to beat Susan Collins, which I think she is. This oyster fisherman has some tats from his youth that are dangerously close to swastikas. And Bernie says, we have all had dark periods in our life. And I think, well, I didn't have that particular dark period. I think there are dark periods, and then there are things that are not acceptable.
Thank
Okay,
you,
well,
thank you, Reed, for finding
welcome.
Talarico, because please, people, play attention to this guy. He's amazing.
Well,
Okay.
he may be amazing and not the nominee, so we'll see.
Oh, he's amazing.
So time check, we're at 2 o'clock.
Okay, we're moving on. I submit to you very quickly before we go on to the courts, these 10 things where we hold the majority position. So it's nice in elections to run against somebody who 60% almost of Americans disapprove of, and elected primarily because of inflation and immigration, and because we ran somebody who they were even more concerned about because of cognitive deterioration. For a while. 10 things where we hold the majority position, which helps us when we're running, after we run against Donald Trump, rather than, as the New York Times, us trying to figure out how to win voters back, we could also tell them that our position is consistent with the position they already hold on these 10 issues. Number 10, the majority of Americans say this country is not going in the right direction. We agree. Number 9, the majority of Americans want to regulate the private ownership of assault weapons to get the bloodstains off our playgrounds. Number 8, the majority of Americans do not want to force Zelensky to give up Ukrainian territory, to give Putin reward for his invasion. Trump's really stuck here, self-professed peacemaker. Putin's not going to stop unless he gets territory. I don't think NATO's going to stop if Trump pledges territory. So I don't know how that possibly is resolved. 7, the majority of Americans oppose deployment of the National Guard to the cities. 6, the majority of Americans oppose throwing LGBTQ citizens out of the military. 5, the majority of Americans support vote by mail. They do not want Trump to take it away. Number 4, the excitement grows. Number 4, majority of Americans want the government to protect the right to choose, not take it away, and not give us this baloney about him believing in states' rights. The majority of Americans, number 3, would not have pardoned George Santos. This is my favorite. George Santos said after Trump pardoned him, I'm pretty sure that if Trump had pardoned Jesus Christ off the cross, he would have had his critics. George should go back to prison just for having the worst analogy ever. Number 2, the majority of Americans want the Affordable Care Act strengthened, not eviscerated. This I wrote before this latest food stamp order. The majority of Americans, when Trump got Timothy Mellon to meet the military payroll by giving $200 million, would have wanted that to have happened for food stamps as well, so we wouldn't have our neighbors facing empty shelves and empty refrigerators. So I think it's good to remember as we go through yet another cycle where we're supposed to be thought of as clueless and not responsive to the needs of American people, that we hold the majority position on virtually everything we're facing. Now that we're not running government, we don't have to take responsibility for inflation like Joe had to, and we have. I think obviously immigration is more nuanced. That is, Americans don't like this. Let's have ICE go into a daycare center and haul off the cuff and haul off the teacher. On the other hand, Americans don't want open borders. I think where Trump prevailed on the immigration, I bet you if you polled Americans, they'd think that 60% of 12 million undocumented are rapists and murderers and at least felons. But of course, it's something like, I don't know, 3%. So I think basically his whole immigration position was based on a lie. So I want to go on to the courts, but that was my little soliloquy on the general proposition of who speaks for America. Even the big bad beautiful bill was a fleecing of the middle class and enrichment of billionaires. I think if I had a criticism of the Democratic Party, I'd say, even when we're not in power, could you figure out who some good spokespeople would be? We had the same thing back when Harry Reid was majority leader. If you don't have a senior national elected official and no one knows who's running for president, then you can have Chris Murphy and Cory Booker and Mark Kelly and Gavin Newsom and Kamala all saying
Sheila would say, don't forget Pete Buttigieg.
Oh, sorry, Sheila, Pete, all saying things. And nobody's the leader. And the closest thing to a spokesman is Hakeem Jeffries, who does okay, but he's not our national spokesman. And Schumer, who's an awful national spokesman. I mean, let me get my reading glasses and look down and pedantically speak from a prepared script. He's not good. And as some of you already know, I asked Cantwell about that, about Harry Reid back in the day. She said, that's not what we elected him for. We elected him because he does a good job of serving the interest of individual senators. I wish there was a way to elevate somebody, because it would be a cross of the closest thing of it would be my governor from Kentucky, I think. But we need a national spokesperson. We're not going to have it. So we're just going to have to make do with what we've got. Questions on this before I move on to the courts? Bonnie.
This was on Chuck Schumer, but I just wondered what your thinking was about him not endorsing the Democratic,
Mamdani.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, Mamdani is very interesting because he's younger than a lot of our children. He's 34.
Yeah.
And he's very vibrant and vital in terms of how he meets people. I don't think his politics are significant. I think he won because Eric Adams wasn't going to and was in the primary. So I think, who's his opposition? Eric Adams, who's indicted, and Cuomo, who's discredited. So I think there are pollsters who are saying Democrats are very angry. So a Democratic Socialist might do a better job of expressing that anger as to what would be possible in a government that worked for the people. So I'm very interested in Mamdani, but I don't think it's consequential that Schumer didn't endorse him. There was some news the other day, well, maybe Mamdani should run against Schumer for the Senate seat. It's not going to happen. Mamdani's going to be mayor of New York. Plenty of Democrats, including Barack Obama, endorsed him. He'll be fine. What he'll do, of course, is set up a war on every front with Trump. What Trump does in trying to withhold appropriations from people he doesn't like, the courts need to constrain. He's the amount of statutory violations and sort of cherry picking who gets money is staggering, especially where the distribution is statutory, like in the New York subways. This is problematic. But of course, a lot of those kind of budgetary misbehaviors have already been ruled in violation of statute or the Constitution, and were frozen as they were in. The injunction was frozen by the Supreme Court, so Trump is allowed to continue the behavior because of the 18 cases where the Supreme Court in the ghost docket has frozen what otherwise would have been impermissible. It's a lot of cases where money has been freed, but that's what Mandami is hoping for, because otherwise Trump will stop sending money to New York. Bonnie, are you more concerned than I am about the Schumer thing?
I maybe not concerned isn't the right word, but sort of surprised, because with a huge win, it just seemed so obvious. Like, I don't understand. I guess I just don't understand why you wouldn't stand up and say, wow, good job, well done. I just.
Well, it could be that there are fundamental positions where Schumer disagrees with them, might be on Palestine. Jake.
Well, I was just going to say, I think maybe the most significant thing about his win was the voters that woke up because of the young people that just are on fire now. And I think it's a good thing, and we all need to take notice and stay on our toes. I think it's good for all of us.
I think that's true. I'm a Bruce Harrell fan, and I'm hoping that he hangs on, but I don't think it's a bad idea to have a 30-year-old or 25-year-old get excited about a candidate. And we did get some youth back in Virginia, but we certainly need them next year.
And I feel like there's a lot of power and clarity in the Democratic Socialist message. That's why, AOC is very photogenic, and Bernie continues to draw huge crowds. So, it's harder, as we may see in our own backyard, it's harder to make a case that's nuanced, that resonates with voters. It's easier to galvanize people with a more strident point of view.
Well, I think, that's the sort of classic argument between liberalism and progressivism. And I think basically what Joe and Kamala decided is to not let the argument go forth. So they would trade off things to Joe Manchin, so he would vote with Bernie, and they knew each other. And we didn't have the classic split on policy. And they worked very closely with AOC. So I think the hope is that there's a way forward with these wings. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure during Biden's year that the differences were so pronounced. There were never more than 15 Democrat Senate votes for universal health care. So it's interesting. Certainly Obama spanned the gap. Depends on what candidate you get as to whether you can hold the party together. I would say that it's often been an argument from progressives that you can win all new votes, and therefore, if you lose some of the center, you've got the excitement of new voters. That's not always been the case. When you run a candidate further to the left, you can get some new voters, and you can lose the center and lose the Senate. I'm not very worried about that. I think we got a big party, and all these races, I'm for whoever's going to beat the other side. And I think this party can have somebody all the way from Mandami all the way to the most moderate Democrat. And as Reed said, why not have somebody in a big city who's got crisp ideas as to how to serve the people? Why not?
And you have Marie Gluesenkamp Perez telling the story in Southwest Washington.
She doesn't have as big of a microphone.
No,
as the-
that's for sure.
But yes, that's true.
Okay,
17
we're at
17
2:50.
minutes on the
Yep.
court.
Go ahead.
This is a fascinating upcoming session. The thing to remember about tariffs is this argument. So I didn't catch this the first time around. Gorsuch says to John Sauer, the Solicitor General. So if we rule that this statute providing the president emergency powers, it doesn't mention the word tariffs, mentions the word regulation. If we permit it, if we rule that it can include tariffs, and if we rule that the president gets to decide what is an emergency, and there is almost unlimited unchecked power to declare an emergency, the court has no basis upon which to review that. Isn't it true that a Democratic president could set 50% tariffs on certain kinds of energy sources and have the national emergency be climate? And John Sauer says, well, climate would not be an appropriate national emergency. Gorsuch said, isn't it true that that could happen under the argument you're making? And Sauer basically says, yes. So that's why there's going to be a 5-4 vote on the courts to severely restrict the use of that particular statute. That's what's going to happen. Gorsuch is going to go with Amy Coney Barrett and make it 6-3, or file a separate, Gorsuch will file a separate opinion. It'll be 5-4 with Coney Barrett and the Chief Justice going with the 3 liberals. The only one of those that's necessarily going to side with Alito and Thomas would be Kavanaugh. So it's interesting. It will create some disorder. They're most worried about the disorder and whether the small businesses would have to be paid back. They'll have to figure that out, but there is no way they're going to uphold Trump's current use of the that statute to levy random tariffs. Kavanaugh was very interested that he used it in India as a foreign policy tool to discourage India from buying natural gas from Russia, because that's a foreign policy position and the president has broad discretion on foreign policy. But he's cherry picking. He's doing it in Canada over a suitcase full of fentanyl because he wants to. Anyway, these 3 things to remember. There's all sorts of cases that there's courts already agreed to hear, 100 or so cases, and very few of them have to do with the direct presidential authority. Among the cases that we might care about that aren't, us against him are things like transgender conversion therapy, transgender sports, and very interesting, the rights of addicts to have access to firearms, which is going to bring up Hunter Biden all over again, because he was prosecuted for saying that he wasn't addicted, which would have disqualified him from having firearms. But the court's looking at that statute in light of the right to the alleged constitutional right to have firearms in your home. So just remember there are a whole bunch of cases that are interesting and are about the Constitution, but aren't about curbing a president's power. And then you're remembering that there's 18 or 19 cases where appellate courts, or a few odd cases, district courts, have made absolute rulings enjoining Trump from certain things having to do with DOGE and certain budget cuts, selected budget cuts, in which the courts have already ruled that the plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits, but where the courts have removed the lower court's injunction and where Trump is free to proceed, even though a lower court has ruled that he's likely to lose on the merits. And these cases will keep on appearing and we'll win some of them. So what we're most remembering is there's 4 huge cases before the court that the court either will accept or has already accepted. So number 1 is the tariffs. The reason why it matters so much is they're not going to wait till next June to rule, because if they do owe some remedy to the plaintiffs, the longer they go, the more they owe the remedy. So they'll vote with each other and assign an opinion in the next couple of weeks. And by February, you might have the tariff decision. And the interesting thing about it relative to the elections in Virginia and New Jersey is it opens the door a little further. As you know, the whole thing about you being stunned into silence or muted is Trump is trying to stun you. He's trying to make America think he's invincible. And the nice thing about the elections is all of a sudden he was more vulnerable. And there's nothing like the Supreme Court overturning his preeminent policy to reinforce his vulnerability, or at least the fact he's not invincible. So we have 3 other cases very quickly. 2 having to do with appointments. So one is the appointment of FTC commissioners. It's widely believed that the court will use that to recognize extraordinary executive powers and to not check Trump in his ability to hire FTC commissioners, Federal Trade Commission, even though the statute is quite clear that Congress has a special interest. Basically, the court's going to say, you have a special interest, but you can't constitutionally constrain this use of executive authority. And then, as you know, there's a separate case against Lisa Cook, who's the Federal Reserve member who is alleged to have improperly claimed second residence as a primary residence. There, the court is likely to accept that Congress has a special interest in the Federal Reserve and in who gets appointed and their protection from the president, since it's meant to be the ultimate independent force in our banking system. So basically, you're looking at a case coming up where the court will expand Trump's powers with one regulatory commission and limit it with another. And that's what I think will happen, which will leave the blockbuster, unless some case finds its way there on budget cuts or some classic case on deportation. There are deportation cases in the system, but in a lot of them, the courts have made rulings on behalf of specific plaintiffs, and there's been no enjoining. The plaintiff gets protected who was going to get deported, and all of a sudden the plaintiff is still here because the plaintiff has prevailed in federal district court. So that's why you're not seeing a lot of fundamental issues on due process, because the lower courts have enjoined Trump from violating the due process of specific plaintiffs. So there aren't going to be some blockbuster deportation cases. The blockbuster, of course, is birthright citizenship. It's still not known. The court already heard birthright citizenship on the question of whether lower courts could issue a lot of nationwide injunctions, and they ruled that there are significant limitations birthright citizenship went right back to a class action suit. The class got certified, and Trump, because of that, is still enjoined because of a class action suit from moving forward on birthright citizenship. One time or another, the court's going to have to take that up, and it is possible. The Ninth Circuit has ruled that the executive order is unconstitutional, and what has to happen is the court will have to take that case and decide whether it is or isn't. It is possible that they won't take the case and they'll let the Ninth Circuit ruling stand. The other thing that could happen that we're watching for, of course, is the courts could start blocking the National Guard in so many states. They're still blocked in Oregon, and Illinois is complicated, that the Trump administration could try and get to the Supremes to block some of those. They're specific injunctions. They're not nationwide injunctions. So the federal district court would rule, no, you can't send the National Guard into Oregon. And so what Trump would have to do is try and appeal that and get the injunction removed without the merits of the case necessarily being decided. So that could happen, but sometime in the next 6 months, you can see the Supremes talking about the National Guard. So that's your Supreme Court report. We're almost out of time. Are there questions, thoughts, or concerns? Insights, discussions, descriptions,
Brickbats.
behests. Bonnie.
Every time when I'm so discouraged and you come on, I come out, oh gosh, okay, I feel better. I could hardly
Good.
wait to hear you today because I thought, oh, he's gonna be so excited.
I am.
Okay, well, I didn't hear all of that, but I'm really glad because we were.
Well,
so
what
excited.
I think I am excited. I expected to win. It's not a huge thing to have won Virginia. It's always a battleground. What's huge that I maybe should have emphasized more is when I kept on saying just 10 months ago, it was 12 months ago, of course, it was last November, the precinct by precinct changes in Virginia in particular, and some extent in New Jersey, are startling because some of the analysts are saying, well, that's just our voters coming out and their voters not coming out, but it isn't. In rural Virginia, somewhere around 8 to 10% of people who voted for Trump last November voted for Spanberg. So that's what's phenomenal.
Mhm.
That's why I'm saying the door is open. The reason I wasn't saying the door was the door doesn't swing all the way open, doesn't swing 2/3 of the way open until next November. But I think we got the signal that we needed. And so no, I feel that right now with those elections, he's a little bit more constrained. I feel that the court has not held the ground that they should have held, but I feel like we've got new energy and that we will take back the House. And I think there's a better chance that we'll take back the Senate than there's been since Trump was elected.
And we'll see if government ever reopens between now and then.
It'll go 2 days, 3 days. It's almost done. It's almost done because once you can cancel 10% of the flights, you gotta figure it out. It'll be resolved by a date certain under which they'll have the healthcare vote and some reassurances to Democrats on that.
I think we're out of time, but thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, the applause. I see the applause. And I want to remind everybody that David does have a blog, Our Unfinished Work. It's at ourunfinishedwork.blogspot.com. And he posts fairly regularly there. And he also comes by here almost every month. We try to persuade him to do so.
Yeah,
So I hope we see you in December.
we'll do it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.